Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this third episode in the brand new series following the River Tweed along its 97-mile course from its source down to the estuary in Berwick-upon-Tweed. I hope you're all well and looking forward to this instalment. And today we have a bumper instalment because it contains two castles, two major bridges, and we meet two master craftsmen. So without further ado, let's get going. From the source of the river to Merlindale, the road has always been on the north bank of the river. In the previous episode, we saw the main road cross the river for the first time at Merlindale Bridge. At Crownhead Bridge, the road crosses the river once again to resume its position on the north side of the river. From Crownhead Bridge, the river now twists along the south side of the road towards the next settlement, which is Stobo. Just as you come into the village, on the right hand side, that is when you're travelling from the west, you come across the old Smithy, which is the home and workplace of Alistair and his wife. Alistair is a silversmith and his wife is a jeweller. They've been here in the Tweed Valley for 30 years. Alistair studied, he was born and bred in Edinburgh, but perfected his craft in Brighton, Sheffield, and then did a master's postgraduate in Edinburgh. They opened their first business in Edinburgh near the castle in 1981. The craft goes back thousands of years to the very beginning of the Bronze Age. Of course, back then the craftsmen perfected the art of making things in all sorts of metals, but especially silver and tin and copper with very crude materials. So although they would have been working from ore, of course, so maybe this was discovered in the fires that they lit in the caves and one thing and another, and obviously realised that when you put ore in a fire, and the fire cooled, metal was left behind. But the working of those early pieces of metal would have been with flint, animal bones, maybe jade, which is a particularly hard mineral, and so on and so forth. Modern day, the silver is worked with steel tools. And apparently when silver work was most popular in Georgian times, each tool to produce a bowl or a piece of cutlery or whatever, then you had to invent a tool to make that shape, because basically what you're doing is starting with a flat piece of metal, and through hammering on an anvil or a tool-shaped anvil, then you form the piece that you're working on. So obviously a cup or a plate or a bowl or a piece of cutlery, each needs a separate tool to work on. Alistair's tools are all handmade. Some of them he inherited and was able to get over the years he's been working. A lot of the tools he works with today, he's had to make himself. When he began art college in the 1970s, there were racks of tools that were available to him. But nowadays, no such tools are made. There are standard tools, but a lot of silver is made by machine nowadays, not craftsmen. Alistair is the only one of a very few craftsmen left in the United Kingdom, and certainly unique here in the Upper Tweed Valley. He's produced some very famous pieces that are apparently in 10 museums around Britain. Another significant piece that Alistair produced was a reliquary for a traveller. And a reliquary, if I can say it correctly, is a house-shaped shrine. One of Alistair's most prestigious customers was the First Minister of Scotland, and he made 200 pieces of cutlery for the First Minister of Scotland that are now on display in Bute House. Or being used in Bute House. The husband and wife team hold workshops here, so students can come and learn this very ancient craft of silversmith and jewellery making. After Hope and Lewin's old smithy, you encounter Stobo Castle, a modern looking construction which today serves as a prestigious wedding venue and health spa. However, the castle's history began back in the 1100s when a peel tower stood on this site known as Hill House. The whole area called Stobo once belonged to the Archbishop of Glasgow. That was until 1541, when it passed to the Duke of Lennox and then to the Tweedies in 1613. By 1619 it was sold to John Murray of Halmire. But for some reason the Tweedies were unhappy with the sale, so maybe they didn't get the price that they wanted or something. And they decided to attack Murray and leave him for dead. Murray, badly injured, somehow made it to Edinburgh, where he complained to the sheriff. What happened to the Tweedies as a result, I'm not sure. But the Murrays were Jacobites, so when the uprising of 1745 failed, Murray lost the castle. It was sold to Sir James Montgomery, the Lord Advocate for Scotland. In 1801, the Montgomerys became baronets, and between 1805 and 1811, a new castle was built, designed by James Elliot. John Lascelles, who designed Tweedsmuir Kirk, designed the porte cochere to the front of the castle. A porte cochere is a French phrase from a Latin phrase literally meaning a carriage door. In other words, where you embarked from your carriage before entering the building. In 1905, it was sold to Hilton Phillipson, an England cricketer who designed the Japanese water gardens and ordered the 3 large lakes to be constructed on the estate. Phillipson died in 1939 and the castle sold again, this time to Winifred Scott, the Countess of Dysart. In 1972, the estate was subdivided and sold at Sotheby's. The castle itself, other parts of the estate were bought by other people, but the castle was bought by the Wynyard family, and it's now run as a health spa. Just a mile further along the river we see Stobo Kirk, the host to that famous stained glass window of Merlin. The first church here was established in the 6th century by St Cuthbert in one of his many journeys through the Tweed Valley. During the 1100s, a new church was built, not in the usual east-west direction, but north-south instead. During the 15th and 16th centuries, the Scottish people were becoming tired of Catholic rule and favoured the new Presbyterian Church of Scotland. Whereas most Catholic churches were destroyed during the Reformation, Stobo Kirk here survived intact, so much of that early architecture still remains. Hanging at the entrance in a glass box is a joug and a padlock. Again, this is an old French word describing a yoke or collar. They were used to punish and shame anyone not following the church's expectations. You might wonder why all these French terms are coming to light at every turn here. Well, that's not too surprising, really. During all the centuries of conflict with the English, the monarchy and rulers here in Scotland had an alliance with France. It's referred to as the Old Alliance. In addition, several of Scotland's monarchs were intermarried with the French royalty. The most famous would be Mary, Queen of Scots, who was married to Francis, the Dauphin of France. So many French words found their way into the Scottish dialect. In 1863, the kirk was renovated by Graham Montgomery of Stobo Castle, which saved it from ruin. From outside, the kirk looks drab and uninteresting, but inside is a totally different story, with a very interesting nave and chancel. The graveyard also has some interesting headstones of people from the early medieval period buried there, and many headstones unusually carved. Less than 100 metres from the church, on the roadside, stands the old schoolhouse in Stobo. The inscription on the front of the building reads 1887. Common sense says it would have been built by the then owners of the castle, who were the Montgomerys at that time, and almost certainly to school the children of the estate workers. Today, the schoolhouse is the workplace of Mark Norris, a master harp maker, another remarkable craftsman living and working here, literally on the banks of the river. He went to school in Peebles, and he told me that when he was at school, he wasn't able to do woodwork because it wasn't part of the curriculum in the early years, and he was in the sixth form before he got chance. But the forward-thinking schoolmaster allowed Mark to make a boat. Now, in making the ribs of the boat, he was fascinated by carving and intricate woodwork. Having left school, he then signed up for an apprenticeship in Hazelmere in Surrey with Arnold Dolmetsch. Arnold Dolmetsch was, if I pronounced that correctly, the name's on the bottom of the screen, if I haven't quite got that pronunciation correct. Not only was a master craftsman, but also a leading figure in the revival of early music played on authentic instruments. So he was making clavichords and instruments like that, and that is where Mark learned his craft. And then he returned to the Upper Tweed Valley in 1981, and he bought the old schoolhouse here in Stobo and added the workshop, which you can see there behind me, to the back of the building. So at that point in time, Mark was partnered by Savourna Stevenson, and she is regarded as the leading harpist here north of the border, a perfect match, a master craftsman in making harps, coupled with a leading harpist. So that was the beginning of a business, and Mark has been here ever since and makes harps for people all over the world. The harp is an ancient instrument. It even predates the bagpipes, and of course it is a Gaelic instrument. There are slight differences between a Scottish harp, an Irish harp, a Welsh harp, or a Cornish harp. The differences are in the design of them, and obviously the differences in the wood that they're made from. However they're made, or wherever they're made, the harp has to be strong enough to take extraordinary tension when all the strings are attached. And if you bear in mind a piano is a similar instrument laid flat, all pianos are now made with a steel frame to stop that warping. But what happens with a harp is, over a period of 20, 30 or maybe 40 years, the tension that's necessary on the strings to get the right sound warps the soundboard on the bottom. And so that is the average lifespan of a professional harp, a maximum of 40 years. The wood that Mark uses to make the harps varies from customer to customer, depending on the sound that they desire, because each wood creates a slightly different sound. The harder the wood, the more, I'm not being a musician, I'm going to use the wrong word here, but the harder the sound, whereas the softer the wood, the more mellow the sound, which is, you know, I guess common sense. So the woods he is using at the moment are walnut or maple or Scottish yew wood. And he has used others, but those are the ones most desired at the moment. Mark's customers are all over the world. He currently is making a harp for someone in Canada, another person in Luxembourg, and 2 in the United Kingdom. But the most far outreaching post that he's had to send a harp to is Outer Mongolia. Mark's made some harps for some very famous people. He told me that the most recent was a lady called Anna McLuckie, who appeared on The Voice, and after her appearance on The Voice, she now has a huge following on YouTube. So I'm sure that if you put Anna McLuckie into a YouTube search, you'll see her playing a Mark Norris harp. Another of Mark's customers was a lady called Jennifer Port, who played the harp at Madonna's wedding when she was married at Stobo Castle in Scotland. Continuing along the river, the B712 meets the A72 towards Peebles. The river turns eastward here, passing a settlement known as Lyne Station. In 1864, the railway line from Symington to Broughton was extended to Peebles to connect with the Caledonian Main Line, and Lyne Station was part of that extension. Of course, the railway and station have long gone, closing in 1950, leaving Lyne Viaduct, which spans another of the Tweed's tributaries, Lyne Water. Just southeast of the village is where the Lyne Water meets the Tweed. The A72 follows the north bank of the Tweed towards Peebles as it winds its way north again. On the banks of Lyne Water, one of the Tweed's tributaries, is Lyne Kirk. It is said to be the smallest parish church in Scotland and perched on the top of a mound. The first church built on this hill was built sometime between 1165 and 1190. The present-day church, which replaced it, was built between 1640 and 1645 by John Hay of nearby Needpath Castle. The porch was added during the 1800s when some renovations were carried out, but the rest is 17th century. Inside the church it has unusual pews at the back with canopies over them and a Dutch-style pulpit. The font dates back to a time before the Reformation of the church in Scotland. In the graveyard is an Adam and Eve gravestone, restored and shielded inside a protective glass cover. Adam and Eve headstones were common throughout the lowlands of Scotland from the 1600s onwards, but have now pretty much disappeared. This is one of the earliest surviving examples in Scotland and the only one in Peeblesshire. The headstone marks the grave of a 16-year-old girl who died in 1712 on a farm close by. The carving on the headstone depicts the biblical scene of the Garden of Eden, with a skull cradled in a swag of cloth and the words Memento Mori carved, meaning remember you must die. Above that is an hourglass, both symbols of mortality. On the top of that small wooded knoll called Abbey Now, and it's spelt Knowe, is an ancient burial ground. Between the 6th and 8th centuries AD, the southeast of Scotland was under the control of the Anglian Kingdom of Northumbria, and it was a period which saw the growth of Christianity and early Christian communities, and burials in those early Christian communities were carried out in small stone slab-lined cists or graves. Over on the mound there in the distance is the remains of a Roman fort, thought to have been built around 142 AD and was probably occupied until 162 AD. It was a small fort, but just proving that the Romans were well north of Hadrian's Wall, and frequent forts are found all over Scotland. Just opposite the entrance to the slate quarry is a road to Kirkton Manor. Here another substantial bridge crosses the river called Manor Bridge. It was built in 1883 and replaced a ford crossing here. Before the Victorian era and the rapid rise of industry, most of the river crossings in the Upper Tweed Valley were shallow ford crossings. At the foot of the bridge, the Tweed is fed by another tributary, Manor Water. From this bridge, the Tweed flows closer to Peebles and enters a narrow gorge. Before it does so, it passes under the Needpath Viaduct. A footpath about a mile long takes you along the riverbank to Needpath Castle. After 100 metres or so, the path forks. Left takes you over the viaduct with great views of the river from above, while the right fork takes you along the riverbank, under the viaduct and on to the castle. The hill on the north side of the river forms the steep side of the gorge, and while a road winds its way around the tight bend hugging the hillside, it is so narrow it is a single lane controlled by traffic lights. When the railway from Symington was extended in 1864, it was forced to cross the river from Lyne Station and then enter a tunnel through the hill before emerging close to Peebles. It was built by George Cunningham of the Caledonian Railway Company, and the architect was Robert Murray. By now the Tweed has width, depth and volume and looks like a real river, no longer a trickling stream or babbling brook. As the river enters this gorge, it turns sharply, forming a horseshoe bend. There, towering above you, perched on the side of the gorge, is Needpath Castle. From the banks of the river, it shows some battle scars, but still very impressive as it looks over this dramatic location overlooking the river. I'm here today filming the last part of the narrative for episode 3 and there's been some heavy rain on the last few days up here, and you can probably see from the river behind me Already it's quite swollen and a much greater volume of water in it than a week or so ago when I was here last.
I'll just pick one out.
The name Needpath simply means cattle path. In the Scottish Gaelic language, a nid translates as cattle, and the way the word nid is said in the Scottish dialect is need. So the narrow path that existed around the gorge here was of course a drover's path for driving cattle to market in the lowlands. So it was a cattle path, and hence the name Needpath. Back in the 1100s, the land here was known as Jedderfield, and in 1190 it was acquired by a Gilbert Fraser of Oliver Castle, higher up the valley that we saw in the previous episodes. He was the sheriff of Peebles and Traquair at that particular time. The title of sheriff was passed father to son, and on his death would have been passed to his son, who was called Simon. Simon was a popular name in the Fraser clan, and it appears regularly throughout their history, making research that tad more difficult to pinpoint which one is which. Before I start telling you about the castle, there is a point of interest to mention first. There was once a vast yew forest here, all around here, and it extensively covered the valley around the site of the castle. Most of Britain was covered in forests at one time, and they were predominantly oak and yew trees. Both trees are very hardy and can live for many hundreds of years. One tree that I know of in the Highlands of Scotland is reported to be over 2,000 years old. In episode 1, I mentioned that a yew bow had been found thousands of years old in a bog close to the source of the River Tweed. Some of the ancient trees from the medieval period still exist near to the castle. So why am I telling you all of this? Well, it's because the yew tree, especially these Scottish yews from the Tweed Valley, have long, straight boughs, and they were ideal for making longbows, the main weapon of the medieval period, of course. The Needpath yews were cut to make bows for the Crusades, and also William Wallace used these yew trees of Needpath to equip his army during the Wars of Independence. Simon Fraser, the great-grandson of Gilbert Fraser, fought alongside William Wallace, as I mentioned earlier. The first Fraser to come to Scotland was in 1160, and two ideas as to where that name comes from exist. The first is that the Frasers originally came from the Anjou region in France with the French name Frasel, and that word was corrupted into Fraser by Anglo and French scribes. The second theory is that the Fraser name came from an ancient French tribe who had strawberries as their badge or emblem. The word fraise in French means strawberry, and the crest of the Fraser clan is a bunch of strawberries. For me, this is the most likely origin of the name. The similarity of the word fraise with Fraser is obvious. The crest can be seen carved into the stone at Needpath. The first Fraser appeared in the records in 1160 in Keith in East Lothian. Turning attention back to the castle now, the first records show that the castle was built here between 1263 and 1266 by Gilbert Fraser. The castle was the seat of the Frasers of Oliver, as they were known, for several decades. Gilbert's son and grandson were both called Simon. It was his great-grandson that was known as Simon the Patriot, as he fought with both William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, as I've just mentioned. He was captured in 1306 after success against the English at Bannockburn and was executed in the same way William Wallace was. The castle was burnt to the ground by the English. On Simon Fraser's death, the ruin of Needpath Castle passed to the Hay family through marriage by Gilbert Hay of Lockerworth, Midlothian, to Simon Fraser's only daughter, Mary, in 1312. Unlike the Frasers, the Hay family were royalists, loyal to the monarch. The ruined first castle was demolished around 1390 by William de Hay, Gilbert's grandson, and the castle we see today was built in its place. Needpath was the Hay family seat until 1686. It was redeveloped in the 1500s with the addition of some of the upper floors. Needpath Castle was not involved in any battles until the Civil War of the 1640s. Before that, it had two famous visitors though. The first being Mary, Queen of Scots. She stayed at Needpath Castle in 1563, 2 years after her return from France, where she had been married to Francis, the Dauphin of France. Mary was the heiress to the Scottish throne, the daughter of James V. She returned to a Scotland in turmoil. While she'd been away in France, there had been religious reform from the old established Catholic religion to Presbyterianism. Henry VIII had died and Elizabeth I was on the throne. Most Scots thought that Mary had a stronger claim to the throne. Mary's tolerant approach to these matters won her support on all sides. That was until she married Lord Darnley in 1565. He was unpopular, and her marriage to him turned the opinion against Mary, which in the end would lead to her downfall. They had one son, James VI, and he became the first Scottish king to sit on the throne of England after Elizabeth's death in 1603, becoming James I of England. He was the second famous visitor to have stayed in Needpath Castle, and that was in 1587. After James died in 1625, Charles I succeeded to the English throne with a keen interest in exercising his royal prerogative, believing in the divine right of kings. This policy was fiercely opposed by Parliament, to which Charles replied by dismissing Parliament. Charles's next move was to impose the rule of the Anglican Church of England on the Church of Scotland, which started the Bishops' Wars. Of course, it all led to the English Civil Wars between 1642 and 1651. In the last year of that period, Oliver Cromwell invaded Scotland with his parliamentary forces, and for the first time in 460 years, Needpath Castle was attacked. The Hay family, you recall, were royalists. The castle came under cannon fire, and some reports claim that it was demolished in the attack. Clearly it was not, as it still stands proud today. A more accurate account states that while the outbuildings were wrecked, the main castle stood the siege longer than any other Scottish castle south of the Forth River. The Hays were forced to surrender, however, and after the wars the castle was repaired in 1660 by John Hay, and a new avenue of yew trees were planted. Needpath saw no further battles, but it wasn't out of trouble. The cost of repairs had bankrupted the Hays, and the castle was sold in 1686 to William Douglas, the first Duke of Queensberry. The castle experienced mixed fortunes under their stewardship. In 1693, William gave the castle to his second son, also called William, who carried out some repairs and renovations. He then left the castle to his son, also called William. William, the third Duke, was not interested in living in the castle and so rented it out to tenants. One of those tenants was historian and philosopher Adam Ferguson. While he was tenant, Sir Walter Scott and William Wordsworth both came to stay, and that was in 1803. The fourth Duke, yet another William Douglas, allowed the castle to fall into neglect, but did further damage by ordering the yew trees to be cut down, leaving only a few to survive today. He also demolished the terraced gardens, and that's where I'm standing at the moment, which had adorned the north bank of the river for more than 600 years. In 1810, the castle was sold to the Earl of Wemyss in Fifeshire and still belongs to that family today. It can be rented out as a holiday destination or hired as a wedding venue. A link is in the description below if you are interested in following up on either of those. The castle has a ghost, but then which castle doesn't have a ghost? Maybe sometime in the future I will feature that story in another haunted history episode. that's the end of yet another episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and keep supporting the channel in all the usual ways. The blue donate link at the top of the page, if you're able to support the channel financially. So if you can't pledge an amount, don't worry, because there are other ways you can help. Liking it, as I've just said, helps. Subscribing helps. But also watching the video right through to the very end, till the last word's gone up on the title and the very last note of the music has been played. Apparently, if you switch off before that, YouTube do not register it as a view. So in that case, it doesn't help. But there's another way you can help, and that is by giving the link to this particular video or any of the other videos to one friend or one family member. Another way you can help is to encourage one friend or one family member to subscribe to the channel. So there are lots of ways you can help and support me and the work that I'm doing. Next, we're off a little bit further down the river, only a mile or so, and we come across our first major town, and that is Peebles. So I'll wish you the very best of health, as always, my very best wishes, and I'll see you all again very soon, but goodbye for now.